DMARC does absolutely nothing inbound. So a lot of people will take on a DMARC project thinking they're going to see less spam and less phishing in their own mailboxes, which is a misconception. There's a very small number of attacks that it actually stops.
Welcome to CyberSecurity Heroes, an IRONSCALES podcast about you, the heroes of cybersecurity. You're about to hear and learn practical and experiential knowledge in our conversations with security leaders and practitioners and other influential InfoSec stars so we can become more cyber resilient and safer together. Cybersecurity Heroes is brought to you by IRONSCALES, the most powerfully simple email security platform. And I'm your host, Brendan Rudd. And now, let's get into the show. Hey Callum, welcome to the show.
Hey Brendan, thanks for having me here today.
It's a pleasure. Welcome to the family and great to have you here today. I'm really looking forward to this episode around DMARC and hope we can help folks who may be thinking about it or working through an implementation or even wanting to revisit their existing one. So as an ex-Mimecast guy, I know you had a lot of experience with this, so I couldn't think of a better person to shoot this episode with. So before we begin, would you mind sharing a little bit about you, your background, experience in the industry?
Yeah, no problem. So I started off probably coming up on about 10 years ago now, and that was just with the basic help desk stuff. So doing level 1, level 2 support before eventually moving up into like infrastructure team. Then I was implementing projects, some of which were on a global scale as well. So I got to travel around a bit, which was quite cool. That was when I moved into MSP world from there. So going from actually being practicing to then being more theoretical and bringing up proposals. And that really broadened my horizons because it was anything a customer could want. They would just basically write down what it was, and then I would have to then master a document together to explain how we're going to achieve it. So that was very eye-opening for me. I got my hands dirty on a lot of different and new technologies. From there, that's when I did move up into working with Mimecast, like you said. And that was, where I really got hands-on with DMARC and where I started to learn a lot about that. So in regards to just DMARC itself, I've done some guest speaking, some conferences. So I've looked into it and I've got some really deep, detailed info on DMARC, which we can get through some today.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I'm excited. We have a super packed episode here. So without any further ado, let's get into the show. So let's open it up with, let's say, the status quo around DMARC. What is the current landscape with DMARC?
Yes, it's becoming more and more important for a number of different reasons, but it's important because I don't want someone pretending to be me and doing anything nasty, and neither does an organization. If someone robbed the bank wearing a Brendan face mask, you're definitely not happy about that, and this is like an email equivalent. My company, Callum Incorporated, I don't want people pretending to be Callum Incorporated doing nasty things over email. So there is a couple of old technologies which do face that a little bit. So that's SPF and DKIM, but they're not bulletproof. They do have vulnerabilities. So this new thing came along, DMARC. It's a new outbound layer that authenticates senders. A large percentage of people don't have it yet. That's the real issue here. So we've got this big gap. People can still pretend to be me, but not a lot of people are really taking it on.
And just for clarification, when you say new, it's not like last month or last year, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. It's not like this year. This actually came around in 2012. It just wasn't made popular until around 2016. This is like specific to the UK. Our government said basically, if you want to work with in public sector, if you want to get contracts with those guys, you have to use DMARC. So naturally, we saw some light uptake around then, but it transpired a couple of years later that hadn't happened. A lot of companies still weren't bothering to do it. So again, in 2018, they really put their foot down and said, no, we really mean it this time. You have to do it. So then we saw another big uptake in DMARC as a technology. And if you go to like informational websites like DMARC. You can see that there was a 300% uptake in 2019. So in the last couple of years, it's really boomed, which is why it's seen as like new, because people are only really starting to take notice of it. And that government mandate is only a small part of it. There are other reasons why it's on such a sharp uptake now. So if I'm wanting to take on some new contracts with a big company, they might send me a questionnaire about my general security and data protection. And a part of that will be, do you use DMARC? How are you utilizing DMARC? So there are lots of other commercial reasons as to why someone would want to take on DMARC as well.
There is a big but here. What's the catch? What is a big misconception around DMARC?
DMARC does absolutely nothing inbound. So a lot of people will take on a DMARC project thinking they're going to see less spam and less phishing in their own mailboxes, which is a misconception. There's a very small number of attacks that it actually stops. So yeah, it stops someone pretending to be Callum.com. Doesn't stop them pretending to be Callum with one L. Doesn't stop them pretending to be Callum, but where the L's come from a non-Latin alphabet. Doesn't stop the A being Greek and them still being Callum.com. It only stops Callum.com. So that's one part of it. Yeah, the other part is the inbound stuff. It's not really having a benefit on what happens to my own users. They're still going to receive generally the same amount of spam and phishing they already do. This is just outbound stuff. That's the misconception there.
And I think another way of explaining it that I've seen used fairly commonly is it's your brand protection. It's protecting your reputation. At least people cannot spoof exactly our domain name. They can, like you said, they can still use similar domain names and etc. But at least the domain name cannot be used, provided that you've obviously set up your DMARC correctly. And we'll obviously get into that later in the show as well. Awesome. So in this episode, we're going to demystify DMARC so that you understand what it was designed for and how it works. And we're also going to help you understand how it's implemented and the steps required and what to expect. So let's get into it. And let's start with some of the basics. How does DMARC work briefly and in non-technical terms?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two things to very quickly understand before we dive into how DMARC works, even before we go non-technical. I'll make these as quick as possible. SPF and DKIM. They're both published DNS records, the same as DMARC, but they are the building blocks of it. So firstly, SPF, it's just a list of IP addresses that I allow to send an email in my behalf. That's it. That's what I publish in my DNS. Your name's not on the list. You can't pretend to be me. However, that does have a vulnerability because it almost sounds like, well, why do we need DMARC at all if that's already doing that job? There is a vulnerability, which is why we have DMARC. It's a bit of a fix. DKIM is like a wax stamp on an envelope. The letter arrived with the wax seal of the king. So I know this has come from the king because I know what his wax seal looks like. I also know that this letter has not been opened in transit. So those are the two big things for DKIM. Again, there's another vulnerability within DKIM. So that's the two building blocks anyway. They have vulnerabilities. Long story short, DMARC fixes them. But I'll give an analogy for this so you can understand DMARC in a bit more detail. In non-technical terms, it's a bit like getting on an airplane. As a passenger has a boarding pass and a passport, and they want to get on this plane. An email has SPF and DKIM, and it wants to get into your mailbox. So there's the current vulnerabilities with SPF and DKIM, which I mentioned, is that I can send an email in a way that it's verified at a recipient gateway with SPF and DKIM, even though it has nothing to do with who I'm pretending to be. I can get big green ticks of deliverability on that email and have it land in someone's mailbox and still be wearing a face mask. But when a passenger boards an aeroplane, a member of staff actually stops them and checks that their boarding pass and their passport actually belongs to them. It's not good enough to just have a boarding pass and a passport. They actually have to work together. They have to belong to you. That member of staff is DMARC. And DMARC is saying, okay, cool, you have those things. That's great. Are you actually allowed, however, to be on the plane under this name? So it lifts the veil. It's a bit of a Scooby-Doo moment. Let's see who you really are. SBF and DKIM aren't really doing that. They're taking a lot of stuff at face value, whereas DMARC, lifts that veil. So as a passenger, I can't get on a plane using your passport, Brendan. I can't get on using your boarding pass. They might be valid to get on the plane. Your passport's valid, your boarding pass is valid, but I'm not allowed to have. That's the difference between having DMARC and not having that control. So DMARC actually goes a step further as well. So instead of just not letting me on a plane or an email into a mailbox, it actually tells the owner of the passport or of that domain, hey, this guy's pretending to be you. Brendan, Callum wants to get on a plane under your name. So that's that kind of what it's providing there. It's actually giving you intel, which you can then go and do certain things about. So yeah, that's like a non-technical analogy of what DMARC is trying to do.
And just to clarify, DMARC is related to policy, whereas SBF and DKIM are more of the controls. Is that right?
It depends in what sense you mean there. So at a gateway, I can have a DMARC, an SBF, and a DKIM policy. So what DMARC is looking for there is, do you have SBF and DKIM? That's like step one. And step two is, right, what do we do about this as well? So you can pass, you can fail, you can pass and fail SBF and DKIM in a multitude of different ways. But yeah, so DMARC is looking into how things have failed and what should we do about them. Should we put these into a quarantine? Should we reject these messages, or should we just do nothing? So they all have their own policies. I guess DMARC is a bit more of an override. It's a bit stronger than SBF and DKIM.
Got you. We touched on it a little bit in the opening, but I would like to come back to it with a bit more detail now. Why is DMARC important nowadays?
So with the rise of like social internet and the ubiquity of e-commerce, spammers and phishers have a tremendous financial incentive to compromise a user account. If I can compromise someone's account, I can get into lots and lots of different things. I've got access to their email now, which means I can start resetting passwords. I can start getting into places and buying things and sending things. It is just easy to spoof. It's easy for me to compromise without tools like DMARC in place and stuff like that. So yeah, it's just tried, tested, proven way to get into some user accounts. And I can use a brand to do that. I can take a brand that you trust, pretend to be them, and then you might look at an email and go, oh yeah, these guys, I work with these guys. I know who these people are. Let me respond to this call to action. Let me click on this link. Let me do whatever it is I want them to do in that instance. So users, when it comes to the kind of spoofing that DMARC prevents, you can't tell a real message from a fake one. You're looking at something on paper in front of you and going, oh, this is from Callum.com. And you wouldn't be able to tell whether that was actually from Callum.com or someone who's just said, hey, I'm Callum.com today. That's what DMARC prevents. So it can stop you actually getting to that scenario where the end user is having to make that call. It's protection for consumers. That's why we say it's outbound protection. It doesn't do much for me and my users, but my consumers, yeah, great. I can stop them getting spoofed. I can stop their accounts getting compromised. I can stop them losing money where my name is associated. That's the last thing I want. I don't want someone to associate the name Callum with I lost money. That's what we're trying to prevent.
Can you give us a few examples of what phishing DMARC can prevent attacks?
So I guess a really good example to use here is actually why DMARC was invented in the first place. DMARC is a PayPal initiative, actually. So people were, prior to 2012, around the 2011 time, a lot of people were receiving emails into their mailboxes from PayPal. And for unsuspecting consumers and users of PayPal.com, for all intents and purposes, yeah, this is the real PayPal. So they would then click on the links to those, to the attached links in those emails. They would follow instructions. They would log into fake web pages that didn't actually really belong to PayPal, but had all of their branding. It looked like their email address on the inbound email. And at the end of that, what's happened is the user has lost their password. They've given up a password to an attacker, and that attacker has now got control of your PayPal account. They've got control of your funds. And this was before the days of like consumer-side multi-factor authentication. So like the Google Authenticator app wasn't a huge thing before 2012. A lot of people weren't receiving text codes back then. So if you gave your password away, you gave up the only key you have. So that's something that DMARC actually prevented. It prevented those emails from being sent out. It stopped people from receiving emails from PayPal.com, which weren't actually from PayPal. So it would stop those attacks where the address that you see in your mail client says like paypal.com. If PayPal have DMARC implemented, obviously. So I wouldn't receive an email from some randomer in like their basement pretending to be paypal.com. That's what it stops. It stops someone else pretending to be them and me logging into a fake platform.
Can you give us a few examples of the types of phishing attacks that DMARC doesn't address?
What it doesn't stop is someone pretending to be paypal.com but with Cyrillic P's. There's no control there. Unless PayPal, of course, owned that domain with Cyrillic P's. That's what it doesn't stop. It's not completely bulletproof in that way. I can still log into a fake platform where PayPal has Russian P's or Greek A's or all these other combinations that you can come up with. That's what it doesn't do. It's an exact match, and that's it. Because it's not targeting other domains. I publish a DMARC record on my domain. It looks after my domain. That's it. It has no real visibility of what anyone else is doing from other domains. So it's not really looking at my inbound mail flow either. So the kind of stuff it doesn't stop are the things we still see every day. A compromised mailbox, it wouldn't stop that. It doesn't stop that supply chain attack, because, maybe one of my senior management's mailboxes gets compromised and they send me an email saying, hey, Callum, I need you to do this really important task. I need you to go and buy 100 Amazon vouchers for a big award ceremony. It doesn't pick that up because it's an internal mail. There's no impersonation there. And also, that domain is already completely whitelisted through SPF, through DKIM, through DMARC. So even if it does become compromised, DMARC doesn't know that because it's not looking for that. So that kind of stuff still happens. It wouldn't stop other kind of loose impersonations as well. If someone was to impersonate me today, they could spin up a Google Mail email account and they could email my HR department and they could say things like, hey, my bank details have changed and I now need you to pay me here. It's not going to pick that up. That's not DMARC picking up that attack. Attack gets picked up by other technologies if they're implemented. But DMARC, no, doesn't see that one. It doesn't see that at all.
And can you just connect the dots for our audience? Like, what is a cousin domain attack and a display name attack?
Sure. So DMARC's doing nothing for those cousin domains or those lookalike domains because it's only looking at your domain specifically. So if I am the owner of example.com, I'm looking to protect example.com. I can stop people from sending on behalf of example.com, fantastic, but I can't stop them sending on behalf of example.com, but where the L and the E are now a 1 and a 3. It does nothing for that. There's no stopping that unless you go out there and purchase every single variation of what your domain might look like, which is just, it's not good practice, and you could be there forever. The other one mentioned there, display name abuse. So that's a really quick and easy one. It's my actual email address might be Callum@corporation, but it doesn't stop someone going on Gmail and just saying, yeah, Callum, just typing that in and making it look like that and hoping that the recipient doesn't notice that it's actually Gmail or something like that.
And what type of illegitimate email does DMARC actually address? Can you run through that again?
Yeah, sure. So it's direct. It protects against direct domain spoofing. So again, to protect example.com, if you were the attacker in the scenario and you wanted to pretend to be example.com, and on the outbound email you put in the header field example.com as who you're going to be, no, that you can't do that. The recipient is going to see that email, see that it failed DMARC. It's going to receive my instruction, which is published in my DNS record, and it's just going to say, okay, I'm not opening this at all. We're not bothering with this. It's failed DMARC. Example.com is protected by DMARC. No, that's where it does actually protect you. And it also tells me about it as well.
Cybersecurity Heroes is brought to you by IRONSCALES, an AI-powered, self-learning email security platform that helps security professionals proactively prevent, detect, and remediate phishing attacks in a matter of seconds, not hours or days. And we have an exclusive offer for our podcast listeners. Discover dormant phishing threats in your organization's mailboxes. Get a free 90-day scan back with a detailed report. Integrate in seconds with 2 clicks via API to Microsoft Office 365 and see what your current email security is missing. Go to ironscales.com/freescan to learn more.
And the industry terminology for this one is called direct domain spoofing, right?
Yes. Yeah, people may have their own terminology, but yeah, direct domain spoofing is the industry standard one.
Yeah, I know that's another confusing piece around DMARC is there's so many different variations of the types of phishing attacks using or circumventing DMARC, and probably we can recap with that in a follow-up piece just to help people connect the dots. I know there's display name abuse, sender name abuse, display name attacks. There's so many nuances, but they all mean the same thing. So that can also get really confusing. So to summarize everything that we've said, why is DMARC needed and how will it help you as a business?
Without DMARC, it just makes it easier for me to pretend to be you. And then everything bad that comes with that. If you had a company and you had customers, you're not going to enjoy the expensive invoices that I've just sent your customers pretending to be you. You're not going to enjoy having their passwords harvested either through a fake login page that I included on those emails. There's a kind of the harrowing fact is, what's the worst thing that could happen if I sent an email from your email account? Because without DMARC, it's a lot easier to have that happen. I don't have to compromise an account. I can just go out there and pretend to be you. That's the harrowing thing there. It's likely, depending on the type of business you're in. So the last point is, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of agencies working with governments, the governments want you to have DMARC. They won't award you contracts if you don't use it because of what I just mentioned. It's a lot easier to become compromised. It's a lot easier to have someone impersonate you. A lot of auditors like it as well. So when they look at your security stack, when they look at your policies, they look at what you do to protect yourselves, protect your customers. They like to see DMARC in there. It's not the biggest red flag, but they are now asking about it more and more. So now it is popping up in the RFPs, questionnaires when you take on new contracts. Sometimes it's, and this is a new one, the last year or so we've noticed it's contributing to insurance policies as well. DMARC is an extra step to keep you safe, and it keeps you away from being indicated that a breach or an impersonation was your fault, because you've done more and more. You've gone this extra step by implementing DMARC to ensure that this isn't going to happen to you.
Great. Thanks, Callum. That was awesome. So now that we have the foundations out of the way, I would love to move into implementations. Can you walk us through a step-by-step hypothetical implementation for anyone listening on the show? So would you walk us through that as best you can on a podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, something I've done a fair few times. So I've got a few things mentally that I can refer to. Yeah, implementing DMARC is actually fairly basic. It's only time consuming in that you need a lot of data to get started, and that data gets collected over time. So you start off, you turn your DMARC policy on. You switch it on in your DNS records, but you turn it on to monitoring mode. We don't want to impact delivery right away. We don't want to stop emails from being delivered in my behalf. Let's just find out who's who. So let's throw it back to earlier. I'm getting reports in saying that this chump is pretending to be me. Thing is, it's not always bad. It's not always some chump pretending to be me. Sometimes it's my marketing mail shop provider. Sometimes it's my HR system, my IT system, my CRM platform. There's lots of these things, and they all send on my behalf. They all pretend to be me, and they do that to a lot of people. For the most part, those people and the email platforms they use will send back reports saying that this HR system, this IT system, this CRM system are pretending to be you, as well as this chump is pretending to be you as well. So now I have my data. My DMARC record tells them where they need to send that data to. It's just a part of the record. It's a couple of email addresses. And it's being sent either to an inbox that I manage or an email address pertaining to a DMARC platform to handle it for me. So now, this is the tricky part. I have to go through that data. I have to sift through it and understand who is doing what. Who's sending on my behalf? How are they doing it? Are they already DMARC compliant? Do I need to make changes to the way that platform sends to achieve DMARC compliance? All things I need to understand from this data. So that is the tricky part, and you can go it alone, or you can get a platform and some managed services to basically do it for you. So once you've understood who is out there sending on your behalf, you start to build up a picture of what needs to change. You need to pull some triggers, turn some keys. I need to make my sending sources, my CRMs, my marketing tools, all DMARC compliant. And for the most part, it's implement DKIM keys wherever, get those guys using my wax seal. I'm approving them, I'm whitelisting them to use my wax seal in my DNS. And also making good SPF changes as well, making sure that the sender here actually pertains to my DNS. So now all of these good players, DMARC compliant, my CRM, my mail shop, my IT system, they're all sending DMARC compliant email on my behalf. I can now crank up the severity of my DMARC policy. I can turn off monitoring mode. I've whitelisted all these guys to now send on my behalf so that when they send an email, that then the chatter behind that email becomes, oh, I see you're pretending to be Callum. I also see that he is completely fine with this because you are DMARC compliant. Come on in. So there are also ways to crank that severity up periodically to mitigate any further failures, but we're not looking to complicate this right now. So then what's left outside of the people that aren't compliant? It's those chumps. It's the people that are pretending to be me and they're not compliant. And that goes back to what I said earlier. Now that I've turned my policy up to a higher level, the chatter behind the scenes becomes, hey, you can't be here under that name. You can't come on this plane. Get out. And that's when, I also become alerted. I also get a report which says chump A was pretending to be you today. So that's really it. Like, long story short, there's no time limit. There's no real time frame. Every company is different in regards to how long this takes. The digital enterprise that sends 2 million emails a day, it's going to take them longer to complete a big project like this than maybe a construction company, SMB, that sends 50 emails a day. There's less data to go through. There's less platforms to change. There's less things to make DMARC compliant. The tricky part for a lot of people is interpreting the reports themselves. They are natively in an XML format, which isn't the nicest thing to read. Like it's in plain English, but at the same time, no one wants to actually sit there and just read XML line after line after line and try and make sense of it. So that's why we have these platforms which receives that data for you and then can then say, hey, Callum, we analyzed 100,000 reports for you. Here's what you need to do. So it can be made really simple. But yeah, if you go it alone, go without the platform, it's a bit of a handful.
Yeah, you answered partially. My next question was, what tools do you recommend for folks wanting to go at it alone? Do you have any recommendations?
It depends on what you need. So for a lot like smaller companies, there are actually free tools that do this. Like if you was to Google free DMARC helper or something like that, there are free tools available. And if you have a low amount of emails being sent on your behalf, that's not going to change. You only need something basic. But then if you need things like managed services and extra little workflow managers and all these audit logs and stuff like that, then DMARC Analyzer that I used to use a lot, that's a really good platform. It's got a lot of tools, a lot of features. But there are similar platforms out there. Largely, they do the same thing. They take XML and they give you something out of it. That's what we have to keep in mind. Like, recommendation for a lot of people that are looking to do a DMARC project is have a think about what it is you're trying to get from this, how desperately you need it, and how much attention you're going to give it. Because if you're going to give this a low amount of attention, it's going to be a back burner project, low priority, then just look into the free tools because they do the same thing. They're not as shiny, they might not be as intuitive, but they're doing the same thing. They're taking the XML and they're telling you, here's what's failing, here's what you could do.
Okay. And in terms of what companies typically get wrong, where companies fall when starting their DMARC journey, do you have any recommendations to those pitfalls that you generally see?
I would recommend that no one goes without a DMARC platform, to be honest. That's, quite a big mistake people make is they turn on DMARC. They create themselves a mailbox, which is just to receive those reports, but they don't realize that every time someone sends an email on your behalf is a new report. So if you think about all the platforms you use and how many emails they send to people, you're filling up that mailbox pretty quick. You're exceeding the mailbox size within days, depending on how big your company is. And then the data is impossible to read, and then you're back at square one. So that's one thing. People think it's going to be something they can just do like that. Other pitfalls: turning on quarantine or reject policy too early. So like I mentioned in the implementation steps, you crank up the severity of what you want DMARC to do. So you come out of monitoring mode. If you come out of monitoring mode too early, or if you don't start off in monitoring mode at all, you've crippled your email environment in one very quick change. It's only a very small DNS change, and you've crippled the environment. You've suddenly got all of these platforms, including like Office 365. If you use a secure email gateway, including that gateway, you've suddenly got all of these platforms. None of their emails can reach anyone because you've not made them DMARC compliant yet. So you're potentially stopping the cogwheels from turning for as long as you keep that policy active. So always make sure that you start off in monitoring mode and make sure you're there for long enough. The longer you spend in monitoring mode, the more you're going to understand how ready you are. So don't jump the gun. It's not a sort of thing you can change overnight. It's a long project. What else have I seen? I've seen some fun things, some people that have done that. But those are the two big ones, really. I guess it's a resourcing issue as well. Again, where this is a long project for a lot of people, you are going to want the resources set aside to look into this. I wouldn't recommend anyone start this project, and if you're looking into buying a platform as well to assist you with it, don't spend the money and then only then realize, oh, I actually need someone every week or every day to be on this and doing this. We don't have the time for that. You've just wasted the cash on it. And a lot of those platforms aren't necessarily cheap. Some of them are, but they have fewer bells and whistles. But it's a bit of a waste of money if you don't have the resources. A lot of these platforms offer free trials as well. A good tip is take the 2-week free trial, understand how much data you're going to be dealing with, and then resource from there going forward. And then you have an understanding of how much should we spend? Are we ready for this?
So if I understood you correctly, as we say in the US, don't do it half-assed.
Don't half-ass it,
Because it sounds like it can get messy and spiral out of control pretty quickly, even though it is, like you said, a fairly simple process, but you need to understand how to do it correctly and not to jump the gun, as you said. You talked about like monitoring and P equals reject and quarantine. Could you go back to that for a moment? Because I'm not sure that everyone in the audience would understand what that means. And I think that's a key component to setting up DMARC.
So that's my instruction, the P equals. So you got your 3 levels there. You got your none, your quarantine, your reject. None is monitoring mode, and that's where you should start. So what that does is, so if you receive an email today from some randomer and they're pretending to be Callum.com, what your email server will do, what your Microsoft do this automatically. If you have another gateway, it'll also be doing the same thing. What that gateway will do is say, well, this person's pretending to be Callum.com. So what we do then, and this all happens within like milliseconds, really, really fast. What that email server does is look at my DNS records, look at Callum.com. And they say, right, we're looking for your DMARC record. And that's where it sees either P equals none, P equals quarantine, and P equals reject. If I have it on P equals none, then your email says, well, we're going to do nothing, and we're going to allow Brendan to receive this email. That's fine. That's what Callum wants. Same with quarantine. Your email server is going to say, okay, well, Callum doesn't want us to just turn this email around at the front door. He wants us to bring it into a holding room where Brendan can go in and analyze it, or if analysts, they can analyze it. And reject is the hardcore one. Reject is nope, you are not coming in. You are not allowed in. Callum has explicitly said you are not allowed in this mailbox. So yeah, P equals, those are my instructions. Those are my instructions to recipients. When you receive an email on behalf of Callum.com, here's what I want you to do with it. It does rely on you actually looking for it. Traditionally, yeah, not everyone was actually looking for these instructions. Again, it's another minor pitfall of DMARC. It's being addressed now. The majority of segs are looking for it by default. Like Office 365 will be looking for it by default. It'll just be in their policies they have turned on from day one.
So the recommendation is to always monitor with P equals none until you're confident in your environment, who's sending what, and your whitelisting, et cetera, before you start making more aggressive changes to reject and quarantine. Did I get that right?
Yes, absolutely correct. Spot on, 100%.
Cool. So if I can understand it, I guess that's a good sign.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Callum, this has been great. Really appreciate all the information and breaking down this semi-complicated topic. So I hope we did a fairly decent job of demystifying DMARC for our audience. If anybody would like to get in touch with you, pick your brain more on this stuff, what's the best way for them to reach out and get in touch?
You can either email me or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to talk to anyone about this topic. It's something, I've been playing around with it for a couple of years. So yeah, find me on LinkedIn and I'll more than happily have a chat with anyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Callum. It's been a pleasure. So thanks everyone for joining us today on Cybersecurity Heroes, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Take care.
That's a wrap for this episode of Cybersecurity Heroes. Practical and experiential knowledge on a day in the life of security heroes. Catch our next episode by subscribing or following through your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, please leave a rating for the show. They really help a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.